Good evening and welcome to the second and final Inside Government show for the spring 2025 season here at CU Community College. This is a show that's shown on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, and the college's radio station, WIN 89.1. There it's only played, it is not videoed. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. The City of Auburn is in the final 6 weeks of its process to adopt a 2025-2026 budget that would go into effect on July 1st, and the process has maybe not been the prettiest that the city manager has seen in the last 8 or 9 years he's been with them. It started with a budget gap of about $8.6 million between revenues and department requests, as well as projected revenue. By last week, that number had been reduced to $2.8 million and a $50.8 million budget. One option to close the gap is for the mayor and city council to override the 2% tax cap, which is not 2%, and we'll get to in just a moment, or to do other things to close that gap. And we've asked both of our guests on to talk about the budget, where it is in the process. We have City Manager Jeff Dygert. This will be his last appearance. I'll talk about that at the end of the show on Inside Government. And Mary Beth Leeson, who is the Comptroller for the City of Auburn. Welcome both of you back to the studio.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So it's been a tough couple of months putting a budget together.
Always is.
Always is. So this is your 8th or 9th budget?
Yes, probably 9.
9th, okay. So first of all, is we tape this on Tuesday at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There is a state budget framework that's been approved. At this stage, do you know any numbers about what you may be getting?
We really don't know much more than what any other average, normal person that read something in the paper knows. So we have no official correspondence from New York State to tell us what's in or what's out. We have a basic understanding of things that we're going to be in, but not necessarily any reassurance on the specifics of those things.
So I know the mayor and council and all of the staff has been advocating for an increase in state aid to municipalities. When you put the budget together originally, and again, the city council has a draft budget now after
Correct.
last week, correct? Mm-hmm. I know there's still a gap in there. We'll get to that in a second. Yep. What numbers did you use for state aid? Was it what the governor put in, or were you more conservative than that?
So we kept it flat with what we received last year. We anticipate that that will be the case when we get final numbers from the state.
So I don't know if it's the New York Times, the New York Post, whatever I read last on this particular subject. It looks like a $50 million increase in state aid to municipalities. That will not solve your budget problem.
No, again, that's across the board for municipalities. That's the same as it was last year, which is what Mary Beth said.
Okay.
We basically budgeted the same as last year. So that was a temporary boost last year, and I believe it's a temporary boost again this year.
But it would be 50 million on top of, or
No.
was it's flat? Oh, she put a decrease in.
No, just to keep it the same as it was last year. Last year was a temporary one-time deal. My understanding is that's what it is again this year.
Exactly.
So what is the process here on out? You, City Council received the documents on Thursday, or maybe even before that. Where are you in process budget-wise for hearings, votes, and things of that nature? We'll get into the specifics of what's in and what's not.
Right. So May 22nd, the council meeting of May 22nd is when the public hearings are for that. The council votes on the final budget, second meeting in June. This week, council has an opportunity to give feedback. Not that they don't always have an opportunity, but this is the official scheduled week for council to give feedback to Mary Beth and I on some of their thoughts on things.
So if they want to add or delete things, this is something they can propose.
Correct.
And do those get voted on separately? Are they put forward at a later date?
When we do that, it's typically not like an official vote. It's just kind of like a straw poll, and okay, who's in favor of doing this, who's in favor of doing that, and then staff goes back, largely Mary Beth goes back and figures out how that's going to impact
So
things.
not as the old days, which was a vote on every single resolution that took forever.
Right.
Okay. Do you might have a straw vote, and it's 3-2, and if somebody says, I can't even vote for a budget that includes that, what happens to a resolution like that?
We haven't been faced with that
Okay.
in quite a while, so I guess we'd have to cross that bridge when we get there. But, you know, I guess it gets down to what happens at the very end. How close do we get to having everybody on board? That's always the goal with everything that we do, whether it's to vote on a simple resolution or to vote on
The
the
goal is
budget.
not 3, it's 5.
The goal is always 5, right?
Okay.
Right. We work hard to try to make sure that that happens. We don't like to put stuff before council that's going to be divisive if we can help it.
And the budget has to be approved for a start date of July 1st, but you have to approve it before that, don't you?
Slightly before, and I can't remember what the exact date is in June. I forget what the
It's usually about the 20th or some.
Yeah.
You got about a 10-day gap in there,
Right.
which you don't have a choice in.
Yeah,
right?
I don't remember what the date is this year and what that Thursday is.
So I'd love to show off with, you started with an 8.6
Correct.
million, and part of that took in items that people wanted, things that were mandated that you had to do, and then the difference is obviously your revenue projections. So how'd you get from 8.6 to 2.8?
So it was a collection of a lot of things. So departments were fantastic at coming back with some creative ideas on how to do some cost savings. We've worked with departments like crazy to get there. We did do some debt restructure, so we converted some short-term borrowings into long-term, which allows for a kind of change in the way that we pay for that, stretches it out a little bit.
Does it make it more costly, though? Does it kick the can down the road so it's more costly when you're doing something like that?
It can be. At this point, we were kind of getting close to a window where we were going to have to convert it to long-term. So we...
And what's that, excuse me if I
No.
can, because we're on this subject, I don't want to have to come back to it. While
Yep.
we're on the debt issue, this is not necessarily debt for the 90 million plus sewer and water. This is
No.
for items that you've paid for that would be considered general operating, correct?
General operating.
So give us an example.
Like road program
Okay.
and things like that. Historically, we did that. The biggest piece of that debt is the public safety building. We owe under 7 million on that building, and that's the largest piece
Okay.
of the restructure.
And so now you're down to 2.8?
We're down to 2.8.
All right, so on that 2.8, are you using any of your fund balance to get to that point?
We are not using any fund balance.
So how large a fund balance do you have?
So right now, fund balance is somewhere in the ballpark of 5 million. However, there are restrictions on our fund balance. And at this point, really available fund balance that the auditors say we can use is 1 million. And given that it's that low.
So what would be the difference on that 2 million?
So the difference in fund balance is related to the general fund loaning both the landfill fund and the power utility fund money that has to be paid back. That fund balance was included in our available fund balance historically. I worked with the auditors and felt like a change in approach was appropriate until that money is paid back.
So your current budget is what, 50?
50.8.
So you're really talking about a 6% fund balance that overall, but really only a 2%.
2%.
Which is below the 4% that.
Right.
Okay.
And so at this point, we're not advocating to use fund balance. We do have a debt reserve. We're going to use about 500,000 out of the debt reserve.
And what's the debt reserve? What's that made of?
So basically, there's been a fund established to pay off existing debt. It has to be used for that purpose only, so we're able to use some monies in this year's budget.
So I'm going to give you the universal question. We've got a lot of viewer questions. They all boil down to one thing. How did the city get into this state where you have an $8.6 million gap? It's still at 2.8 right now. General question is, how'd you get to this point?
Well, I think if you look at what's been happening over time, right, as you mentioned, frequently when we first start having our budget discussions every year, there's a significant budget gaps, right? Those the proposed budget or the initial budget's based on needs and wants, maybe some more wants than needs at times. Those things You know, they get cut out. And I think that over the last handful of years, staff's done an excellent job trying to run efficiently and to
Because you
only
put
spend
off
when they need
some,
to.
I think last year you and I talked about, you put off some purchases of vehicles and other things of that nature,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
At some point you
Each
can't.
of our departments actually has a vehicle replacement plan or policy, and each of those were set in place a handful of years ago with best intentions, but the way things have gone lately, we've had to really kind of deviate from all those apparatus and vehicle replacement plans. Same goes for buildings. You know, we had a few years here where we've invested in our buildings. It's not the end, though. You know, if we look at City Hall or the police station, those buildings were built in 1930, and they need a significant amount of work. Casey Park was another example. That thing was built in the early 1970s. It had been about 50 years, and over the past few years, there has been a reinvestment because some of the stuff was original there. So it needed investment, just like anybody's home or anything else. So as far as our facilities go, our facilities still need some work. We try to, you know, get by and do a little bit of work here and there. Operationally, though, every year we go through this same exercise, right? And every year we do our best, and council's done a great job, staff's done a great job
But you haven't
trying
been
to
down to this
stay.
type of gap, have you, in
It's
recent years?
not this big, right?
Okay.
But it's been sizable. We whittle it down. We try to keep it within the tax cap. We've been successful at keeping it within the tax cap. And
So the
so
core-
sooner or later, right?
Right.
Sooner or later, you can only stay within that tax cap for just so long, or different things will suffer. The delivery of services will suffer. Our ability to maintain our various fleets or our buildings is going to suffer at some point.
So the corollary to this is your labor costs have increased, correct?
Right.
Is that because of recent collective bargaining agreements?
No, you know, we go through a process. We don't operate in a vacuum when we have those collective bargaining negotiations, and I personally have spent a lot of time comparing what our municipal workers get in all the units compared to our neighbors and other like-sized municipalities across the state, and we're right in the middle for most of those things. So I don't think our folks aren't. I think they're being treated fairly wage-wise for the most part, but not extravagantly, if that would be appropriate.
So what are you doing on the sales tax front? Are you keeping it flat? Are you increasing what your estimate is for what you're doing?
We had a very small increase budgeted for sales tax.
Because you've had quarters where it's been on the incline?
So we've had consistently an increase in sales tax revenue over the last few months, year per se. In addition, we know that we have a couple legal cannabis dispensaries in town that tend to generate additional sales tax revenue. So very small increase in sales tax.
And when you were on last time, I don't think you had gotten a check yet from the state. Have you
Not
started?
yet.
So you don't know?
No.
And there's two right now?
There's two.
Wildflower and Flintstone?
Flintstones,
Okay.
correct.
Pass them when I come downtown from my town. Okay, so one bright spot, though, in the revenue front is your ambulance service, correct? Revenue-wise.
It doesn't have an impactful positive effect on anything. It still costs some money to run that service. It's not like we're generating.
You're not covering costs then?
We are covering costs, and it's a struggle to do that. That is not a money-making venture. It's
No,
not
but
gonna-
originally there was a lot of criticism.
Right.
You know that this was going to be an out-and-out money loser. You were going to lose millions of dollars. There was a time where you were trying to collect bad debt. That's been
Right.
resolved for the most part, hasn't
Well,
it?
that's going to be a constant struggle. It will be a constant struggle. It's a struggle with every organization out there that provides that service. So we provide the service to provide the service, not to generate revenue. That's where that is.
So
We're not balancing the budget off of running.
No, I understand that, but it's not what critics were charging originally has not come to fruition financially.
No, it's not doom and gloom. No.
Okay. So let's talk about the gap. We talked about the restructuring debt service. Another one is the idea, you have several ideas, I believe, on that. You both do. One has been to take advantage of an early retirement incentive, correct? How does that work?
So basically, we've made an offer to all of our collective bargaining unions to offer an incentive for people who may have missed out on the incentive that's currently in the agreement, to opt for retirement. That could generate savings because hiring a brand new person as opposed to someone who's been with the city for a very long time tends to be less expensive.
Okay, so let's walk that through. You have about 30 that are eligible. You've been with the city how long now? 21 years? How many?
31?
31?
I'm in my 31st.
31, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You've never had 30 people take early retirement all at once, have
Back in
you?
2014, we had a fair amount of movement when this was offered in 2014. That was the first time we had done that in a very long time.
Do you think you'll
It's a
get...
different world out there now. We're not seeing immediately, we're not seeing that same reaction to it. So time will tell. I can't remember, people have till May 15th to give us an idea on whether they'll go or not. I suspect that we'll have at least a handful of folks go.
But that wouldn't give you 100% savings, because in many of those cases, you're still going to have to, if
Replace.
that's a patrol officer, you're still going to have to replace that
Right.
with a younger 20-year-old.
Right,
As,
right.
as I told the chief.
But there's
a couple weeks ago.
significant savings there, you know, and I can speak to, you know, what happened when we did that in 2014 with the fire department. We ended up with about a dozen firefighters, took advantage of that, and we brought in 12 new folks at a lower rate and a different pension and all of that, and it had an impact. It had an impact that was positive for probably 5 years that we could feel.
So between the, there's three options, let's talk about the two. Between restructuring debt and let's say you have a handful or more of retirees, how much does that cut your 2.8 million?
I mean, ultimately, I'm hoping to get to 2.5. I don't want to restructure debt in a way that's going to cost taxpayers more money.
Oh, okay.
So my goal is to get 2.4 or 2.5, something like that. And then we still have to make some hard choices.
Okay, so there's usually, now that we're down to the nitty gritty, there's usually two choices. One is you can raise taxes, or you can cut services and personnel.
Or some combination.
No, but what I'm saying, those are,
Right.
that's what's left on the table.
That's what's left on the
2.5,
table.
correct?
Right.
Okay, so let's deal with the 2.5. At this particular stage, what is your tax cap number? What's your rate?
So we're at like, if I put the 2% increase in, we're at like $11.70 per thousand. That gets us an additional $535,000 of revenue.
So 2% gives you, is it 2% or is it a different amount?
Well, it's slightly different.
Okay, but you're going to the top of the scale.
But going
You're-
to, and ours is like 2.2.
So
I
if you're
think.
going to 2.2, that raises you about $500,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so does that even do your road program?
Well, road
Yeah,
program.
the road program's been very well supported by New York State in
No, but
recent
what I'm saying
years,
is the
so-
overall cost. $500,000 does not do your full road program. I'm
Oh,
just
no.
giving a compare.
Oh,
So
no,
somebody
no,
would
no.
know that,
No.
okay. So with that being said, so what's the number if you had to cover 2.5 without cuts, what would your rate have to be to raise 2.5? I'm thinking you're at 12%.
Correct.
And my math's not usually that good. But that's,
It's pretty simple math at this point.
Okay.
And ultimately, you know, what I've said to council, which may or may not mean anything to people, but what I've said to council is, we're all taxpayers too, right? And we understand the challenge for a resident at that level tax increase. So we want to try to find a balance, but we also understand the services people rely on.
so your tax levy, am I correct on this, is still going to be up 4.1% as it currently is, correct? Or no? Is it 2.2?
It's really 2.2.
2.2, okay. So on top of all this, you have some other items that are, well, let's deal with the, okay, if you don't, I'm assuming nobody is supportive on council at this stage of doing a 12% tax increase.
Correct.
Am I generally correct on that?
I think you've got a good feel for that, yes.
Okay. Because the tar and feathering businesses
Right.
aren't local.
Right.
Okay. So, so if that's not the case, where do you see cuts coming from? Because at some point you got to cut some services.
I think we need to look at maybe not even a cut to service, but a change in the way we deliver a service or the frequency that we deliver particular services. I don't,
Can you give us I mean, you must be running some scenarios now that, I mean, is it not doing the
you know,
swim program? Is it not
I
picking up
think
trash
that-
every 5 days a week?
That we look at all of those things, right? So we look at, in the last few years, especially with the availability of ARPA funding, the city did quite a bit of programming, like recreational programming, things like that, feel-good stuff, which is great.
But ARPA's done.
ARPA is done, and I think we need to retract back some of those things.
So with that, you still have, could this lead, so those are part-time. For recreational, are those mostly part-time positions?
It depends. I mean, the
summer
core
workers.
maintenance of the facilities and running of the facilities is, full-time staff.
So you are looking at, there could be some staff cuts in this combination.
I guess with a budget like that, anything's possible. I certainly want to avoid that. That's been one thing that I've been pretty strong about from the very beginning. I don't like to approach things like that, but if push comes to shove, that may happen.
So there are other pieces that, we were just talking about property tax, there are other increases within the budget. So you've got a refuse fee that looks like, if I'm again doing my math, correct me, because I know you can do all this math in your head. You're going from 276 per property to 420,
Correct.
which is about a 35% increase. Why is that? That's a giant leap. So why is that? Does it go?
Been underpriced for several years. Last year there was a jump to try to close that gap. That gap still exists. The cost of providing the service continues to increase. What that proposed rate doesn't necessarily even take into account at this point is there's a big question mark over all of that, and that is the how long Seneca Meadows stays in business, and if Seneca Meadows doesn't stay in business, or if their pricing jumps significantly, that's going to have a direct
is
impact.
its own separate enterprise fund.
Correct.
Okay, so the other enterprise funds you have several of them, but let's talk about the main two, sewer and water. So in those particular cases, you're looking at 2% increases?
Correct.
And is that just the cost of doing business, or is there a specific reason why it's going up 2%?
It's essentially cost of doing business. We've done a lot of work recently with rate studies and trying to make sure that we're charging a fair price. But we also want to continue to invest in our infrastructure. We need to make sure that we can deliver, clean water to people and those kinds of things. So we have in that rate structure that we've done analysis on.
Do you know how much it'll impact a normal household?
I don't know off the top of my head,
I'm
but
thinking it's $1 or $2
yeah, it's
per
not.
quarter.
And if
It's not a lot of
if you
money.
recall how a water bill or a water and sewer bill comes through to you, there's some standard charges.
Right.
And then there's
That's what I'm doing in my head.
and then there's some that are volumetric. They're based on the volume that you use, and that rate increase applies to the volumetric charge, not the base charges. So.
Less showers for kids who play sports. Okay, so
Or quicker. Just quicker.
So none of this increase has anything to do with the $90 million upgrade, because in that case, I think the last time you were on, you talked about you're just retiring some of those bonds, replacing them with new bonds, correct?
Correct.
So there's no rate increase. This 2% has nothing to do with the.
And on the sewer side, the project has the potential, like in this budget, there's reduced energy costs because the process is a little bit better. So the reduced energy cost is actually reflected in this budget. So it offsets the debt payment in some, not
As
fully,
well as
but
disposal costs.
Right.
So we always had the solids disposal
Right.
cost, which that cost has escalated dramatically in the last few years, and there's no end in sight of that. So this will help rein those costs.
But you
in.
could see in several years from now some increases in. You still have to pay for the the bonds over time.
Correct.
Okay. Let's go through process, and then one last thing for you. So City Council will vote this week on whether they want to have a public hearing on May 22nd to raise the tax cap. You need 3 votes for a hearing, correct? And if you get to the 22nd, or whenever, when you get to the budget, let me ask this, back up a second. On the 22nd, will they have a number for a tax cap increase, or is it just a hearing to say you will increase the tax cap?
We may be closer to that. I'm trying to remember where we'll be at in the budget process there. They're going to be
We'll be closer.
Hopefully.
But they
hopefully
don't
we've got it.
necessarily have to vote. And one of the things that I've said to council to take some pressure off this process is always have the public hearing. Because then if we get to the 11th hour and we can't make it at 2%, you have the ability, it gives you the flexibility.
So that decision may not be made until the budget vote in the
Right.
second week of.
Right.
And you won't be here for that. You're retiring before that, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Not for that reason.
No, not for,
but-
no, but it was planned that you were going to be here till
Correct.
the end. About a month ago or 2 months ago, you said you were going to leave at the end of May, correct?
correct.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Anything new in the budget?
There's nothing new in the budget.
So no major, you're not adding anything into this
No.
budget now. So I did want to take a minute or two, talk to you. You're done for just a
Yay.
second, but you can't get up and leave. So you're leaving a bit earlier than you had planned. What are your plans after June 1st?
I don't have
You are
any-
keeping
I-
this close to the vest.
I have no specific plan. I know a lot of people think I do, but I have no specific plan.
So you have a daughter who's doing what?
She's at school. She's away at school.
Doing what, though? Because I think this is cool.
Okay. She's going to be a pilot, or she
Okay.
is a pilot. And
She is a pilot.
Yes.
And so, do you plan to travel? Do you want to work again? What do you want to do? So you
But
were.
I'm sure I'll find something. That's yes, I want to work again. I don't know if I want to work full time or part time or what. So we'll see what happens.
So what do you think? You've been at the city you've been in the city 31 years, but and let's leave out being chief for a while,
Okay.
Because I know that's its own entity. As manager, what do you think your biggest success has been? So let me preface this so
I
you
don't
have
know.
time to think. I've asked this of Donna Lamb and Unity House. This is my standard question. So if you haven't watched those shows, you didn't know it was coming. So what's been your biggest success?
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask my peers or folks in the community what they think that was. I don't know. I treat it like.
What do you think the biggest challenge has been?
Treated it like a job from the beginning and tried to do the best I could all along. We've had all sorts of stuff come up. You know, within the very first couple of weeks in this position, we were faced with it was the first time most people in the community ever heard of blue-green algae or a HAB or a microcystin. So that happened literally within weeks of me getting into this position. So that's been an ongoing challenge. We dealt with COVID. We've done quite a few things. If you look back at things, we closed a landfill, which might not seem exciting to most people, but that was a big deal, right? That was talked about for many, many years. We did the agreement between the college and the city for Falcon Park, which between that agreement and everything that happened with the minor league ball team, which are a huge.
Yes, as you know.
Yes, you're a big baseball
Mr. Baseball.
fan. That is a lot, or was a lot at the time. There was a lot going on. It took a lot of time and attention, and it was kind of a contentious thing in the public. So we got through quite a bit of stuff. We've tried to make progress where we could on things.
What do you want your legacy to be? That when they think of you, what do you want them to have thought
I don't
about
know.
you?
Really, all I really honestly care about is that people realize that I did the best I could, given the circumstances. It's not easy. It's